It can be explained by the nature of the crisis, and the first data they acquired was shielding data. The report also showed that the prevalence of the use of data was around existing data sets that were collected by public sector organizations, so either within local authorities or the other public sector organization. And that was really to deliver essential services and support vulnerable groups. So this is by comparison to what we called in the report novel or like smart data. So data, for instance, like IoT data, sensor data, and really like we only seen a very limited use of this type of data in response to COVID-19. So really the prevalence was around existing public sector data sets and utilizing them rather than more novel or smart types of data. And finally, the research also shows the rapid development of innovative solutions to integrate and analyze these data. So multiple data sets within local governments, so different departments, or with public sector organization. So we've seen the creation of dashboards, for instance, the use of geospatial technologies, another example that was seen across local government. And the second kind of key finding I wanted to present here is around data sharing and how it has increased during the crisis and the pandemic. So we've seen an increase of data sharing across the public sector and the development of data sharing agreements. So it was kind of a rapid development of data sharing agreement with participants saying that it has accelerated the processes of building up and adopting sharing agreements. So, for example, between NHS bodies and local government, obviously in response to a very pressing and urgent need of intelligence. Participants highlighted, however, an uneven access to data. So that wasn't necessarily jointed all the time. And some of the data sharing were done between an individual local government and NHS body, or several local government and NHS body. So it was not always jointed. Participants also flagged up that the patchy data quality, and that was both within local government and across public sector organization, so that they had to really put a lot of effort to clean and integrate the data to make sure that it was a quality data set. And they highlighted the difficulties, which I think are known, encountered by the lack of data standards across public sector. What was really positive, though, is that there was an increase in data sharing across the public sector, as well as a consolidation of collaboration and collaborative networks to kind of coordinate practices and share learning. So, for example, several participants mentioned the sharing of data agreement templates between local government, or the participation in the COVID-19 Data Intelligence Network, which is led by the Scottish government, or the participation in the local government data task force, which is led by the Digital Office. And really, they've seen that as key to successful data sharing within the public sector, but also across sectors. And here, the report really put some recommendation, and I'm just going to briefly mention some of it that reflects those findings. So it's really recognizing the importance of public sector data and bring this to the forefront of data practices. There is also a recommendation, you won't be surprised, around investing in data capabilities to strengthen the newly gained data practices. So in other words, sustaining this momentum and not reverting to pre-COVID-19 practices. And finally, developing and adopting data standards across the public sector, but also building on this collaboration and shared learning is something that, as I said, was seen as key. So yeah, I think I will leave it here, and please do check the report. I'm going to share the link on the chat, and I welcome any question.
Super. Justine, thank you very much. I'd like to suggest that we keep the questions till we've heard from George, but the term "never waste a good crisis" comes to mind here. COVID has really reinforced for us the gaps that are there, and most importantly, to your point, it's there is a willingness to collaborate, and there's a desire, and I think through your recommendations, that provides the foundation stones by which we actually manage to sustain that and institutionalize a better way of doing things.
Yeah.
So it will be interesting to look to the continuance of the activities in Scotland and learn from it. And I would, having read the report, I'd recommend it to others. So thank you for that, Justine. We'll come back afterwards in terms of hearing the counterbalance view in terms of digital health innovation in Scotland. So over to yourself, George, as Chief Executive of that particular organisation.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Graham. And what I'd like to do during my presentation is really expose you to a little bit of my world within digital health and care innovation. But a lot of what I'm going to say, you'll be able to lift and drop into your own organisation or your own city or your own world. So my task for you is to maybe, yes, listen to what I'm saying, but try to transform some of the lessons learned or some of the challenges I'm going to set out to you into your own context and your own lived experience. So we are Scotland's National Innovation Centre for Digital Health and Care. We are funded by Scottish Government. We are located in the centre of Glasgow, and I always now, at the moment, show this slide. This is our office. It's the smaller building on the right-hand side. And I am in a cupboard on the 3rd floor. We don't have the whole building, by the way. And the only reason I show this slide is just to try to remind me where I work, in that I haven't been in the office since March of last year, courtesy of the global pandemic. This is our vision. No surprise there. It's about how we can support Scotland's people to live longer, healthier lives at home, create sustainable services, but at the same time create economic advantage for Scotland as a region and for the UK as a nation. So we've got a joint remit. So for me, if we hopefully, I'll try and go the right way this time. If we are looking at the world we're inhabiting now, it has been turned on its head by the coronavirus. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's look at the facts. It's a global issue. It is not specific in its challenges to us all, but our lessons are also generic. And some of the key lessons are these. First of all, it doesn't matter how good your policy is, although that's important. It doesn't actually matter so much as what you put in legislation, apart from highlighting how you're trying to get your populations to act. That the coronavirus has demonstrated to us that it is down to the behaviour of individual citizens that actually determines the impact of the virus on our families, neighbours, communities, cities, and in fact, our countries. And therefore, the fact that we all around the world inhabit communities, the fact that 97% of healthcare is delivered in communities, means that our future should be focused on communities. But the sad lesson is that we always revert to talk about institutions. And in the pandemic, it's exactly the same. Most of the news broadcasts were about pressure on hospitals, number of hospital beds occupied by people with the infection, number of intensive care beds. These weren't the major battlegrounds. The major battlegrounds were in our cities, in our communities. And that's where digital can really make a difference. The reality in Scotland is this. During 2020, there were about 600,000 less referrals to hospital services than in the year before, 155,000 less planned hospital admissions. And that's with the same burden of disease, notwithstanding the coronavirus. So what we know is there's a lot of citizens at home not accessing public services at the moment for a variety of reasons, sometimes fear about infection, but other reasons, who at some point are going to knock on our doors. And the challenges are, do we have the capacity to deal with that demand when it activates itself and comes knocking? And in a health and care service, and the same as a number of public services, we really know that we do not have the capacity to meet that demand if we continue to deliver services in the way we're delivering them at the moment. So whereas we're looking at vaccination as being the salvation of getting us over the major impact of the coronavirus pandemic, it is not going to solve the challenges that we're all going to hit over the next 12 to 18 months. But one thing the virus has done for us is it has really focused on digital. And who would have thought in Christmas 2019 that we would be celebrating family birthdays, special occasions, using technologies like this to link to our families? Who would have thought that anywhere you are in Europe, you could order a Michelin-starred meal delivered to your door online, do most of your shopping online? Not me. I'm surprised if anyone in this call, if you're being honest, could have predicted the world moving the way it is. So our citizens are thinking digitally in their day-to-day lives. And public service providers, institutions have to access the know-how and knowledge on how you not simply create an app and pat yourselves on the back to think you've done everything well, but build an integrated ICT infrastructure and system to allow our citizens to access services on their own terms in the way they wish to access services, as opposed to what happened in the past. You were grateful that you could access a public service just by nature of the fact it was there. The fact it was difficult to access was not actually taken into consideration. And in the healthcare environment, this is our reality. Most of our money was spent on treatment and post-event care. We can't continue to do that. We need to move to a new world where most of the focus actually changes to prevention and anticipation. So what is our future? Well, the future for us is investment in public services needs to be seen as investment, not as cost. And I don't know what it's like in your city and your country, but healthcare spend was often regarded as cost. And what do we do with cost? We try to cut it. If we look at spend as investment, it turns that argument on its head. And that is key to our future. So when we're looking at data, what we found out is if we look at the determinants of your health and my health, genetics plays a significant part. But what are the other things that influence our well-being? Well, what we know is that the access of the healthcare system in your country has about a 20% impact on your health. 30% is down to your individual behavior, smoking, drinking, lack of exercise, what you eat, that type of thing. 10% the state of your housing, and 40% down to your social and economic environment. Now, what we did is we mapped on the outside of that pie chart the data points that we can readily collect about a citizen in Scotland. And what we found is the healthcare system in Scotland is making life and death decisions about me and Justine and colleagues based on about 16% of the available data. And that is replicated across Europe. So if we could start to blend citizen-generated data with formal health and care data to better understand the lived experience of our citizens and put that into their own hands to allow them, you and I, to make better health and well-being choices, the world would be a much better place. But at the moment, we think about data serving its masters, and its masters are institutions and organizations. What if we truly put the citizen at the center? What if we connected up the spider's web in a way that basically says the citizen becomes the point of data integration? And to do that, we need to change our thinking. Just putting a posh bathroom into your house and a shiny hot and cold tap doesn't mean when you turn the hot tap on, hot water will come out of it. What you need is the boring stuff, which is the plumbing behind the walls that makes it all work. So we need to look at our ICT infrastructures and design cloud-based infrastructures that are fit for the future, but they work on behalf of our citizens, not on behalf of institutions. Because what we all like to do, and I've worked in the public sector all my life, is like to put our technology thinking behind a wall and make it all very neat and tidy and trim the hedges and keep the paths clear. Whereas you and I and our families in a day-to-day life, we live in communities. We thrive on an exciting life. We like things that are different. We choose different things at different stages in our life. We select different opportunities, sometimes how we feel. We have to make sure our services are able to cope with that environment. And what digital does, it allows us to personalize services so that they actually become more accessible, even for the most chaotic lifestyles. So we have built the ICT architecture of the future. I'm not going to go into what it is. It's based on a data exchange and a personal data store where citizens can curate their own data to allow them to make those better health and care choices. And I'm just going to leave you with this thought. Everybody thinks that when you talk about innovation, we talk about technology. And yes, technology is important. But actually, if we didn't invent any other technology from today onwards, it would take us at least 60 years to implement what we've got available to us today. Because the key thing we need to be focusing on is service innovation and business innovation. What are the service models for the future? What are the business models that allow us to adopt and scale solutions that serve our citizens in a meaningful way, and at the same time cater for the needs of organizations? Because I bet you at the moment, the ICT that you use in your workplace are designed to service the needs of the organization and the people who work for it, and the citizens are the passive recipients of the benefits, as opposed to being the focus the other way around. Thank you very much for listening.
George, thank you. Very compelling story there. There's one data point that says that 16% of the data that's actually held is used to make life and death decisions on individuals, I think is the wake-up call. There's a huge number of really important points that you brought out there that link also to what Justine is talking about. And I'd like to cause us now to think about what does that mean from a European Commission perspective. I'm thinking of data spaces. I'm thinking of the climate neutral and smart cities data space, because we've heard a very strong message there in terms of some of the data futures, if you like, in terms of predictive, in terms of citizen-centered, and in terms of getting the plumbing right. I'd like to think about what does that mean from a standpoint of industry, and what does that mean from a standpoint of cities. And I'd pick up that last point, perhaps linking it to what Trevor will cover off, is the complexity of investing in all of this. Putting something on the cloud makes it available for a lot. So I have one question, I guess, to both of you. Scotland has very few big cities and a lot of small places. There are communities. Do you both see that as we move forward, if we can manage to get it right in terms of the plumbing and in terms of the process of sharing data, that willingness that Justine, you talked about to sustain it, do you feel that we'll be able to build a model which isn't one Glasgow and Edinburgh fighting about who's doing it best? It's actually Scotland doing something for the citizens. So that's a question I'd like to pose to hear your views and then open it up to the floor. Justine or George?
I'm happy to start with that. I think the answer to that question is yes. The underlying cloud-based ICT architecture needs to allow data to flow from the citizen, from the communities, from IoT devices into back-end databases. And the issue is we will use data and we will collect data as we're delivering services to serve the needs of our citizens. If at the same time as using that data to deliver the service, it is then collected and is allowed to be used to drive our business intelligence functions, promote decision-making, support planning, that can be a major success. So it's collect the data once, use it many times, but in an architecture that is fully GDPR and consent-driven. And it's the consent-driven piece that is fundamentally important here.
Super. So if we flip that model to citizen-centric, put it on the cloud and share it, your sense is a very positive outcome in terms of the future there, George. Justine, from a local government perspective, what have you picked up by way of local government wanting to also embrace that type of model and move forward?
Yeah, no, one of the theme we looked at and that emerged in the research is around like centering data practices about on the public benefit. And I think local authorities were saying that there is a key in collaborating together to do that, but also to figure out the different use case that we can have and really articulate the public benefit. So it's like knowing what we're doing already and sharing this learning across local government, but it's also working together to figure out how we can make the public benefit the center of data practices and share that knowledge as well. So I think there was this recognition definitely around that, and working together was part of it. So of course, there are bigger local authorities like Edinburgh and Glasgow and Dundee and so on. But also we found a very innovative practice and a willingness to collaborate within other, maybe smaller or more rural local authorities. I think it's something that is across the board, and what is needed is the investment and having these spaces to work together and really share the learning at that kind of Scottish scale.
Yeah. So I guess if you're thinking of this superstructure being something which the regional government drive in terms of the basic logical infrastructure, and I think the point you raised in terms of use cases, very practical things that keep it very real and tangible, the combination of those two, one provides the foundation for the future, and the other actually starts to deliver demonstrable value from it. Thank you. Questions from the audience. Gabor, if I put you on the spot to a certain extent, starting from a Commission perspective, I'd be intrigued to hear what the Commission sees in terms of that story, in terms of an enabling environment, and then we can pick it up to some of the others on the call. Do you want to have any reflections, Gabor? Then I want to move to yourself, Matthias. We don't seem to, maybe we've lost Gabor. Matthias, then, you flagged.
Yes, I just also dropped it in the chat. So about what was said before, and the requirements are needed regarding data and architecture and the data flow and the openness which is needed. Also, where data sovereignty for cities is guaranteed, as you may remind, or you may remember, a couple of years ago. There was a MOU by the Smart Cities and Communities initiative by the European Commission, and a DIN specification followed that MOU. So a framework of, and also a reference architecture of such platform models. I think it's already there. So and this could be used as a framework. So I don't think that this has to be started from scratch, because we have the MOU, which is a couple of years ago, and we also have the DIN spec, which is still an actual document and a guideline, and this is the way this DIN has to be. This DIN specification has to be respected as a guideline for cities if they go for such platforms, and also as a supporting document by preparing appropriate tenders.
Yeah, so Matthias, thank you for that reminder, because you're absolutely right. My observation would be that the urban data platform work focused on somewhat more the technical design, so the plumbing piece, and you're absolutely right, it's there, and we need to build on that as a technical foundation. What I think is missing is the data side of things. I see you, Joachim, the data side of things, and I think that's been brought up certainly by COVID, but how do we manage the data? How do we value the data? And how do we manage the protocols behind the data? So it's the combination of both the plumbing, which is indeed captured in that document and others, and also I think the new agenda, which is perhaps less managed and captured in terms of data guidance. But I think it's important to build on what we have. We're not good at that, frankly. Joachim, let me pull you in.
Thanks. As being involved in the just mentioned architecture, in the reference architecture of the EU, so I was one of the authors of it. Also not named, but I wrote this specification as well. Secondly, I am one of the authors of the mentioned 91357, but still I see that there is now a lack. And so I'm with Matthias, there is something, but I also see the lack, because the question is, and in one of the projects of the EU, in the Hamburg project, we used the DIN spec as well, but we've seen that there's something missing. And so therefore, we also wrote a paper which is called, which changes the OUP, so the Open Urban Platform, towards an open standard-based urban platform. And that is a very difference, because what is the missing piece within the 91357 is really that there is a recommendation for standards. And that's also what I wrote into the chat, because that was one of the things when I listened to one of the previous speakers, that one of the important matters I see is also the question of the data room on top of such a platform, which is non-specified at all, and where the question is, which is the leading, let's say at least the leading standard, which could be then on the one side the time-based standard, or it could be the let's say the geospatial-based standard. Because one of the challenges we face within cities is the time base and is the space base. These are the two essential pieces which we're talking about. If we then tackle on later on to subjects like the often mentioned now famous words like digital twin or something like that. Yeah. So this foundation is somehow, yes, I'm fully with Matthias, and we both wrote also on the 91347 which is for the humble lamppost. So there is something, but I do see that there, for some of the matters, there is a need for a continuation. Challenge I also see, as you might know also, I'm the chair of the DIN Smart City Standards Forum in Germany. So what I see right now is also the challenge that how do we get the financing for standards for these people who are working on this subject? This is one of the crucial elements I still see. I've just had a chat today with the Deutsche Bundestag, and I also mentioned this subject. It is not solved yet. I only see a group of maybe 10 people who is working on the subject of standards for Europe in Germany for Europe. Yeah, in Germany, this is really it is less than 10 people even. And the challenge I see, for instance, right now that, for instance, China is pushing with new models, also with models around standards around data platforms and so on. And the challenge I really see is that we do not have, let's say, the grip on this subject. And again, due to a lack of financing, because I can understand my old company and my new company. I can also understand that, for instance, Matthias' company, his boss, Lutz, is working tremendously into the subject. Yeah, we're working together on lots of these standards for DIN. But still, the trouble is that this is still not enough if we see how many people working in China. So this is my one point for this subject. Secondly, what you've just talked about, unfortunately, is only in German. But today I also had this chat with these guys regarding a new paper we just will bring out. It's in German, or in English, say Impulse paper. It's a magazine we're bringing out from DIN with respect to, let's say, new topics which are facing the subject of smart cities. It will come out tomorrow. It's about digitization in the crisis. So therefore, I think lots of the things I've just listened to, we have already in this paper. So it's quite interesting. Secondly, we talked about resilience of cities. And thirdly, we talked about sustainability. When I talk about these subjects, I think what is also important, I created now a new, let's say, I had an idea talking about the sustainable diagram towards a sustainable, I think in English you call it rhombus, where I add now to ecology subjects, social subjects, and economical subjects, also technical subjects. So the question we really face to is also to think about, in this case, also to standardize what is the meaning of sustainability and what is the meaning of resilience with respect to digital systems. This is really important. Not forgetting about the social elements, which is then, for instance, talking about sustainability for future generations, which I think is really important, and not only taking sustainability as an ecological thing. So, and the technical part, why I just put this rhombus, is back again the question of standards, because what we also need to think about in order to have also, this is the whole thing about a digital balance, because the other thing is, if we don't think about the digital balance, we will face a rebound effect, because we will take more and more energy for all this digital helping systems, which is then taking the wrong direction. So all in all, what I'm saying here is, on the one side, for what we're talking about integrated infrastructure, we still need standards. We still need the work on interoperability, point one. Point B, we need to talk really about which kind of data standards will we have, also with respect to find the way between China and USA. So to have really a smart city made in Germany, this should be really our goal. And thirdly, we also need to think about, if we think about smaller communities, you touched also a very important point here, we need to think about also how can we challenge the infrastructure in a way that for smaller communities, they need to bundle, I guess, in order to, let's say, have also, let's say, clusters of intelligence within such a metropolitan or, let's say, community region, so that they can also be in a situation where they are resilient for these shocks and also sustainable.
I wanted to.
And I pressed yes and then dropped.
Welcome back.
Can you hear me well? Yes. Well, very rapidly, I have a question for George. So I wanted to ask him if during the crisis, some solutions emerged that he knows in Scotland or within DHI to use some digital tools to connect citizens with public institutions or to establish systems of support among citizens.
Yes, there were a number that were put in place. For example, the type of architecture that we've just been talking about, we made available to our citizens, and still today, most of our test and protect, so health protection systems, are now sitting on that new cloud-based infrastructure. So, in fact, all our citizens get their test results delivered to them electronically, either by email or by mobile phone. But equally importantly, if you test positive, you can contact trace yourself, so you can report your contacts. And what we found is, by designing that with our citizens, 40% of people are doing their own contact tracing within 12 minutes of getting their positive result. They're still followed up by the health protection team, so they get the phone call with the public health people. But these phone calls are much shorter because they've already pre-populated the data. They are much more focused, and the citizen feels involved and part of the solution. And, you know, everybody on this call knows that if people feel engaged and committed and listened to and valued, they comply more. So we found that we're getting about 50% our self contact tracing. They start within 12 minutes, and 78% have completed the whole process within an hour and a half. At the start of the pandemic, it took a minimum of 3 days, and in some places in Europe, it's still taking between 3 to 5 days to do contact tracing. So that's just one example of using that infrastructure. We're using it to support people who are shielding at home, to support people who are still furloughed from work, and so on and so forth in similar ways. But what we've done is, rather than have individual apps and individual services that are working in silos, because they're part of this underlying infrastructure, the data can come back fully consent driven, of course, into our back-end health intelligence functions. And that can be used for future service planning, resource planning, and next phase of delivery. I hope that answers some of your question.
Yes, indeed. Thanks.
It sounds like a very positive case study to pick up on. I wanted to just go back to Joachim's point. I dropped off, apologies for a bit, but there was an important aspect that you raised there, Joachim, and I'd like to ping that back to Gabor, who I think had some connection problems, but maybe back on now. This aspect of, are we keeping up in Europe with the pace of development of guidance and standards? And Trevor, who is very much the sort of equivalent of what you are in Germany, is involved in that similar sort of activity in the UK in terms of standardization. So to Gabor, any other reflections from what you've heard in terms of Justine and George and what that means to Europe and to the Commission and to data spaces, and a specific in terms of what can we do to actually put the resource behind putting quality guidance and standards together that are well written to the audience to actually engage the market, because we know that most standards which are currently produced aren't actually being used by cities. So broader reflections on what you heard from Justin and George, and the specific question in terms of standardization. Any views on that, Gabor?
Yeah, thank you. I hope now you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, the standardization work is one of the most important work streams in the Commission. It's not primarily managed by my DG or my unit, but we are also the standardization. But definitely, this is the essence of the work. What we should enable to be.
It seems that we are getting bad reception from you, Gabor. Yeah. So given the connection challenges, I suggest we have a specific next step to work on the standardization agenda to involve those on the call that are interested and the Commission, because I think there's a gap which is in my mind emerging around what we can do on improving guidance and standards. I use those two words with a bit of a gap in between the two, because standards are typically seen as being boring technical documents that nobody ever uses. The facts in cities are they don't. They're used by expensive providers or by suppliers. And what's needed is guidance, which includes engaging politicians around key messages. And a lot of those key messages are what you've been articulating, Justine and George, in terms of a shift. So I think there's an agenda point that we should pick up on standards, and I'd be happy to convene a discussion on that with colleagues in the Commission.
Can I jump here just a second?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up some of the point Joachim was making earlier, but also on standards. That's really something that emerged in the research, and participants really recognize the need for data standard, and in particular common identifier. So really this idea of the stamp of the data, if it's geospatial or time or whatever. So that was really this was brought forward, and for them it was obviously agreeing on a standard, but also investing in it. It was addressing the system legacy that they had already and addressing the data set that they had already, and move that into the standard. So I think it's important also to point out that there is a real opportunity in terms of investing in data standards here. Yeah.
Thanks, Justine. So I'd headline that point. And number one is the technical material we've got at the moment's not bad. Needs a bit of a brush and polish, which I think was Joachim's point. The data guidance and standardization is a clear gap. And the broader guidance in terms of how do you engage people around the other aspects that George particularly pointed out in terms of business models and in terms of service design and innovation. A lot of that is really important for us to work on. And that's not a technical thing, but it is a guidance thing. Who do we trust? We trust the guidance, we trust the standards body. So I think there is a really important point that we brought out there. Are there any, so that's one piece to move us forward. Are there any other questions or key points that people would like to raise before we kind of transition from this particular agenda point on? Trevor.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. I was really going to come in a bit earlier, actually, to echo the point about standards, not just from my perspective, as you say, as being involved in British standards around smart cities, smart and sustainable cities, but it was also something that came up very strongly in the session yesterday about small cities working together, small places working together. That standards and interoperability, the two things that have featured in the feedback so far today, they were at the heart of the needs of small cities. I'll say a little bit more about that in my short presentation later, but I just wanted to reinforce what had been said from that perspective, and also what you were saying, Graham, that there is many standards already around data, both general and very specific. But again, we find experience-wise that they're not widely used, and the reasons for that, I think, are complex in some instances, but I think they need to be more accessible and more relevant to practitioners, perhaps, than they currently are.
I also think if we could get it right, then, I mean, you raised, Joachim, the point about China and what they're up to. I mean, big compliant market, lots and lots of tech providers. Asia Pacific generally is taking over in many ways on the agenda. We are very socially responsible in Europe, and very joined up and very looked at by many other parts of the world. And if we can actually get us act right, then that will help us to really deliver for Europeans and also deliver for European businesses, because businesses need the foundation standards. I don't know, Gabor, whether you...
If I may add to this, Graham, I would really raise the point, why shouldn't we try to have really like a stamp smart cities made in Germany? That was really my point here, saying we make it in a different way and we show a different path.
Yes, and I
like a certificate, maybe that's the best name for it in English. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think I'm conscious of the fact that we've fired off national standards documents from BSI, from DIN, from AFNOR, and so on. Not presenting ourselves as Europe in a way which is best. Now, that doesn't mean let's get rid of all national standards bodies by any manner of means, but let's, for God's sake, get ourselves right at a European level. I don't know, Gabor, whether you can hear or whether the connection, but if you have a view at the back end of that, it'd be really useful to hear a Commission perspective on that.
Yes, I can hear you. I mean, 99% well, so it should be okay. And I would like to react just what Joachim just said. So absolutely, the work what we are doing is one of the reasons is that we want to provide cities the opportunity to choose solutions that are tailor-made to their needs, and we don't.
I'm glad you've changed your name from DG Connect to something else. Alas, we've lost you again.
Really want that. What is this?
No, Gabor.
Sorry, can you hear me?
We can now, but as soon as you get into the really exciting stuff, we get technical issues. Try again.
It seems that it's still there's a problem.
Yeah. Okay. No. So let's not battle too much with technology. I mean, the good news for me is we've got absolute firm agreement from everybody on the call that there's an agenda point here for us to move forward with. I would not lose the point that Joachim raised of how do we resource this in a way like China does, in a way that we actually move fast on this and move together. Because at the moment we're moving poorly as a bunch of technical people not looking at what really matters, which is innovating in business models and services, engaging politicians, all those sorts of things. So there is definitely agenda there. Super. So George, Justine, congratulations. You've stimulated some thoughts for sure. You are more than welcome to continue and stay with us. We're going to look at the 4 initiatives that we've been looking at, and really, so where are we at and what do we need to do next? And they relate to all the conversations that we've had at the moment. The first of which, my suggestion around order, is that we cover off the data platform, because that's sort of a natural transition from where we've been. We move from data platform to small giants, because you've actually been looking at digital transformation and had a discussion and workshop on that also yesterday. From there to geospatial cities, so we stay with the data but take a different perspective on it. And then finally, a few words in terms of the humble lamppost. That's the order I'd suggest. You're more than happy to. Yes,
if I may, before you start with that, we had some polls prepared, which I wasn't able to share earlier. But from the marketplace, we would also like to know a little bit the people that are joining and whether they are participants of the action cluster or not. So I don't know if you see the poll right now. Okay, this is working. You can maybe continue with what you were saying while people also give us some answers. Thank you.
Not at all, not at all. Yes, so that's the order. Urban data platform, small giants, because they're dealing with digital transformation as one of the topics. Geospatial cities, staying with the data agenda, and then briefly on humble lamppost. And indeed, if you could fill in Christina, that would be useful. Christina, could you, I don't know whether you can do two things at the same time. Males can't, females can. Could you pop the slides up? There's one slide that I wanted to flash up on each of so one on urban data platform. What's important here? Three things I think which matter. Number one is we have had a survey since 2015. We've had 3 surveys. Somebody's tapping away on a computer. I don't know whether it's possible just for a mute if that happens. Is that working? Super, thank you. So 3 important points here. Number one is, how are we progressing in the market? Monitoring. We did a 2015, 2018, and 2020 survey. 104 participants from 82 cities in Europe, most of which were the lighthouse cities as part of the Smart Cities Lighthouse program. That survey is very insightful. It really shifts the agenda towards data and trust and all of these sorts of things. For those that haven't read it, I would commend it as a very good read. The interesting question, picking up on Gabor's point at the beginning, we've got lots of initiatives dealing with digitization. Sensing where the market's at, both in terms of putting platforms in place and using them to add value, is something I think we need to focus on. So in terms of the survey, I think it's essential that we continue with it. I think it would be very, very helpful to align it between the various different digital initiatives so we can get a clear, crisp, simple message to cities that this is the survey for Europe, as opposed to a survey of which there'll be an intelligent cities one, a living in EU one, So message number one is monitoring how we're doing is important. We've got 82 cities already. It would be great to have that comparison over time, and I'd love to propose that we do that collectively together. Point number one. Point number two, there is a set of alignment actions specifically between the Urban Data Platform and the Living in EU initiative. You won't be able to read it on that slide, but it basically tries to look at where we've come from in terms of the Urban Data Platform for the last 10 years. So let's not lose good things that have been produced, and what has been launched as part of Living in EU to try and fit those two things together. We came up with that, I've got to say it's a year ago now. I had that discussion in the Integrated Infrastructure Initiative a year ago. I think it's time for us to cause that to be real in terms of alignment between not just those two, also some of the others. That alignment is key to make it clear, crisp, and simple to the marketplace, and particularly cities in that, but I would also include the supply community. And the final point is the inventory of assets. So this picks up on Joachim's point about the DIN spec, the BSI spec in terms of guidance. There are probably 8 or 9 documents. They're rusty, they're old, they deserve resourcing to improve the quality of them and to ensure that they're a coherent portfolio that will engage a politician all the way down to an executioner. So that portfolio of guidance is not sufficiently robust as we stand at the moment. And I think that picks up on our point about standardization and the discussion there. So that's kind of where we're at in terms of the urban data platform. I read the goal, 300 million citizens by 2025, and I've done that every year for the last 10 years. When we launched it, we had no clue what it meant and whether it was possible. I actually feel reasonably comfortable about that, frankly. I think it's entirely doable. And I think, going back to George and Justine's point, if we can start to put the technical foundations in place in the cloud for lots to access, you don't have to be a big city with a big budget. And I think that technical solution as a service is a different business model that enables us to get to that 300 million. The key thing now is about getting our trusted management of the data and the processes that hang behind that and building the engagement politically. So that's, for me, the Urban Data Platform Initiative. We have a governance group. It's insufficiently active as an initiative, though there's a lot of action in the field. And the missing ingredient here is a means by which we tie things together. So that's the headlines on UDP. Are there any questions or people that like to pop in on that particular point? I think we can probably stop sharing the screen now, Christina. Thank you. No?
May I ask briefly the question?
Yes, sure. Is that
Sergey? Yeah.
Cornell?
Yeah, yes, for most. So suppose there is a municipality which is interested in practical application of things which you mentioned. Let's say I'm speaking about our things. The cloud digital twin can be installed within 10 minutes. It can be linked with 60 MS Excel files, which municipality can enter as the example of ISO 37120 indicators of quality of life sustainability. They can do it as a template. They enter their data, and then within 1 month, they can see holistic vision of the whole city. We tested in several cities already. So there is no big deal. Let's say everything is practical, everything is realistic. What should be done to make it happen?
Yeah, I sense your frustration there, Sergio, and actually you're one of many. So within the initiative, we have quite a few organizations that are bringing solutions to the table. And the aspect of sharing and collaboration is very much what you're going to hear from Trevor also, in terms of how you can bring cities together. Big cities typically don't collaborate very well. Smaller ones perhaps do better. So I'd hold off the answer to that. 2 points. Number one is, it's like yin yang. Number one is the Smart Cities Marketplace is not a sales platform, but the other side to that is an engagement platform amongst different parties. So you've got a client, a city, or that's interested. As part of the Smart Cities Marketplace, what we're seeking to do is to stimulate demand and bring investors to the table. So if you can bring demand and investors to the table, you can perhaps, through the investment, get the demand, i.e. cities, to decide to collaborate. And then that can be a platform to bring in solution providers. That's one way of making it work. The other is, as a solution provider and a city, to bring a specific project to the marketplace if funding is the missing ingredient. I think that often it's not a case of funding, particularly for urban data platforms, it's something different. So listening to Trevor, because I think that might intrigue you. Cornell, I see you've got a question in there, which is, what's the difference between an urban data platform and a digital twin? This is precisely the conversation I had with DG Connect colleagues several months ago, and I've had with many people. And in some ways, we talked about, could we have something which is almost like a 0 to 5 ladder, which allows you to actually describe what would be the characteristics of shocking and leading edge digital twin with all sorts of simulation, visualization, all that sort of good stuff. I see it as a continuum. The interesting question that I posed of Commission colleagues was, is there a means by which we can leapfrog? Is there a means by which smaller or less advanced cities can actually leapfrog? And a couple of the providers in the conversation have said, yes, I believe there is. So I think that, again, to answer your question, it's a continuum. One is the data knitting and the technical knitting to share through processes, how information is exchanged between departments and with people. And digital twin is where you start to plug in other things like AI, ML, machine learning, algorithms and such, like 3D visualization, those sorts of things. I see that as a continuum. I hope that gives you a bit of a perspective. Good. Let's flip from urban data platforms, hear from Trevor in terms of the small giants, and then take things forward from there. So over to yourself, Trevor.
Okay, I think I have a few slides. Just by way of introduction, while the screen is shared, my name's Trevor Gibson. I'm Smart City Leadership and Development Manager with an organisation called Opportunity Peterborough, which is essentially a company owned by the City Council aimed at driving forward economic or sustainable economic development in the city of Peterborough, and Smart Cities is part of the way we do that. So I've also been, as you heard from Graham earlier, involved with the Small Giants initiative with Graham for many years now. And we had a plenary session yesterday, which was really useful, very well attended, very time constrained because we had an hour to cover a very large topic, but nevertheless, it was very worthwhile. If we just look at the next slide, we've basically undertook some research early on in 2021, which formed the basis, if you like, of the plenary session, the parallel session yesterday. And there were a lot of positive findings from 6 questions we asked, in that obviously smaller to medium-sized cities are very proud of their size in many ways. They like the fact that networking and collaborations within the city are relatively straightforward compared with the scale and complexity of large cities. One of the mayors I interviewed as part of the process described his city as a city of small journeys. And what he meant by that was that people, citizens, businesses, organizations can reach others that they need to speak to or work with to take things forward. And ironically, in some ways, in the current circumstances, COVID is leading, and it's not just across Europe, it's globally, the COVID experience is leading people to move into the smaller cities, the more rural locations, if you like, because of the experience they've had of being locked down in more compact urban areas. So I think it is a topic that will become more and more important than it goes on as time goes by. We know anyway from fairly well publicized research that I think it's 90% of residents across Europe live in places with populations of less than 50,000. So it's it is where most people live. And at the moment, as you can see from some of the challenges on the slide in front of you, there is a lot of concern amongst small cities about the progress they're able to make on this important agenda. I'll go through some of these very, very briefly, but there's a recognition, obviously, that challenges are on a different scale in small cities. They're often in different contexts. They may have rural implications. For instance, many more rural areas have a big population, or small cities have a population that live in rural areas which are not very well connected to the rest of the world in digital terms. So that may be something that's very different than to a large city. A common thing we heard in the research was it's very hard to be heard. Small cities feeling like they're one of many, that governments, that Europe, that even the regions within which they sit find it very hard to communicate with a mass of small places. Much easier to go to the well-known larger places for those connections, projects and pilots and so on. A very strong message that came out and was reinforced by Annelies Apf on the panel yesterday, who coordinates a group of small to medium-sized cities in the Thuringia region of Germany, is just the scale of the workforce in small cities. So it's not even about a lack of experience in specific areas. It's sometimes just a lack of people, a lack of hands to get to grips with a funding proposal or the idea of a collaboration. There just often isn't the number of people there to drive that forward. There's a common experience of a lack of critical mass to attract those renowned partners, the large businesses, the esteemed academic institutions that are often requirements for funding and for some types of collaboration. A feeling that that solutions developed in large cities often don't work in the smaller context. When you break a bit off or reconnect components of a large solution, it often doesn't work, or if it does, it doesn't work efficiently. So that idea of starting small and building up to something or scaling up to something larger, we think is a far more efficient way of developing. And I should say we considered all of this yesterday in the context of digital, because there was a number of topics that we could have covered. I'll come back to that in a moment. I've mentioned about the COVID-19 experience, but a recognition through the research we did, and certainly through the panel yesterday, that there is some action needed to give those cities a voice. If we look on the next slide, we also asked in the survey, and it was reinforced again by some of the topics we discussed yesterday, were common themes of interest, and those are the ones that most of the cities we spoke to over a number of years now, but more recently in the survey a few months ago. Those are the topics where people were looking for collaborations, challenges, things that they're aiming for in their city, whether it be that digital transformation or circular city. These are the areas that are ripe for those collaborative opportunities that we've been discussing in the session today. And just some ideas, the questions we were asking people yesterday was, the clear understanding of the benefits of collaboration. How do smaller places drive that collaboration? What do they need? How can stakeholders, whether they be business, investors, governments indeed, how can they help smaller places achieve that? And on the final slide, I've just captured, I haven't actually finished capturing all of the outputs from yesterday because it's still fresh in my mind, and it was hard to write and listen and moderate a session simultaneously. So I'm looking forward to rewatching the recording on that. But these are just some of the thoughts that leapt out at me when I was thinking about feeding back to this session. Obviously, the support's recognised. A fairly obvious point that collaboration has to have that common challenge, that common need, and a shared sort of vision of what we're trying to achieve through it. And digital transformation is a very clear example of that. It can serve all sorts of purposes, but actually the collaboration should be around agreeing what that endpoint looks like. We recognise that resources and specialist knowledge was limited, and a really good point, which is often overlooked in collaborations, is that degree of trust that small cities maybe are not used to dealing with big business, are not used to dealing with academia on that scale, or unusual partners perhaps. So building that trust is also important for a successful collaboration. A good suggestion that came out, which I think is worth pursuing in a bit more detail as a takeaway from yesterday's session and even today, was the idea of a collaboration or innovation pool, whatever that looks like. So a central place where small to medium-sized cities that lack those resources, that lack that particular expertise, that don't quite know where to look for the partners that might collaborate with them, from whether it's other cities, whether it's big business and so on, having that all in one place. And it's something certainly that Graham and I have talked about before, is having that central hub where a lot of this activity takes place. And certainly the case studies from select successful collaborations can also be kept in that same central location. We had a good debate as well about scalability. I mentioned earlier about building for small, but in a way that you can scale up. There was quite a lot of thought from the audience, really, that they didn't see scalability or looking at the world in that way as being particularly helpful. And I guess it's a different viewpoint, but they were saying that actually there should be a recognition that small cities are different. Yes, they need to collaborate, but that they are different, and that the solutions will probably inevitably different in some instances. And the key point, going back to something I reinforced earlier, was that doesn't matter if the standards are in place and if the interoperability is in place. So something that at first was sort of at odds with what I was thinking, actually was a very good point, and a very challenge to perhaps the way we've been thinking of things in some instances. There was a lot of talk, as we've covered here already, about data sharing at scale, with a purpose, and the quality of that data being essential. And we had Neil McCarthy from Crust Technology, fascinating chap on the panel, doing great things on data platforms for all scales, really. But their business model is about driving the cost of that digital transformation, those data platforms for that use a common standard, that are interoperable, to almost zero for small cities. He strongly believes there are ways of doing that. So again, a really exciting point to end on for that, and one that we're going to take forward with Neil to look at how we can drive forward. And the intention is to revisit then, using this as a sort of template, if you like, digital transformation as a template. The intention is that the Small Giants Initiative will go back through those lists, that list of common challenges, and see if we can build those build momentum behind each of them and start to capture that in some way. But yeah, I think the big takeaway for us was still this idea of a central point, a pool or a hub, where the collaboration can actually be inspired and be driven from, and where the expertise and experience can sit to support others in joining the party. So that's all I wanted to say at the moment. There's a lot more to capture, but I think those are the key points relevant to today's discussion.
Super. Thank you, Trevor, and welcome, Georg. Just passing by, joining in, so you're more than welcome to join that. What we're doing is just going through the initiatives briefly. So Trevor, I mean, you know perfectly well, I'm very passionate about the need to support the smaller cities community, and the idea of the pool, some mechanism, is good, but I'm not too sure. There's two thoughts. Number one is, I'm not too sure that's enough, really, in terms of really stimulating the action. We always rely on, let's set up a knowledge base, and then nothing happens. I think this aspect of stimulation is absolutely key. There's a few thoughts that come to my mind in terms of political stimulation, in terms of financial stimulation, in terms of the investment community, and in terms of supplier stimulation. So we can't seem to rely on the traditional ones. So I think we need to look outside of the traditional in terms of trying to stimulate and cause action. What I liked, and on you had a list there, so you've brought Neil into the conversation. I'm sure that Sergey would be hot on the trot, Matthias would be hot on the trot as folks that do that. If I understand it right, the intention is for all of those half dozen topics, come up with a model using digital transformation, which is design that works, ensure that stimulates, and then start to use the industry stimulation to try and provoke some sense of common interoperable standards rather than, you know, sequestered, I've got and captured this audience. What's missing? What do you feel as a result of the work you've been doing, which is needed to move us from a very, very good design to proof points?
Again, a good question, and one we revisit regularly. I still think it's that resource at the centre, whatever it looks like. I entirely agree with your comment, Graham, that you know, a pool or a hub on its own is clearly insufficient. It has to have something to do. But I think if that were you know, to be developed in parallel with some of those connections and the impetus provided by politicians, the market, and so on, at least there's a place where things happen, digital and physically. So I see the two as aligning hand in hand, because I think one of the things that happens currently is that there are examples of very strong collaborations amongst small and medium-sized cities. Often they happen out of necessity because they simply can't do something. It might be something around transport, connectivity, or whatever. They simply can't do something on their own. So it tends to be driven more in that way. And many of them express the fact that they don't know where to find those linkages. They don't know where to find other cities. They don't know where to find the case studies that might inspire them into action. So I think some kind of central resource, and maybe in the first instance it's a person or half a person, to start to make and maintain and further develop those connections that we're lacking at the moment. As you and I know, Graham, this is something that I do within many other things, and it would be really good just to have a relatively small amount of dedicated resource really to push on some of these open doors.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Trevor. Let's move now to geospatial cities. And by the way, Gracia, I can cover Humble Lamppost in 10 seconds. So we'll use most of it of the time for yourself in terms of geospatial cities. We've talked about data platforms. We've talked about digital transformation for smaller communities. Now, from a standpoint of geospatial cities, tell us where things are at on that. You're on mute at the moment, Gracia.
Thank you. So we've been running the program for 3 years now within Eurisi and within the Smart Cities Marketplace. So I'm going to give you like a little update in very simple words of what are the main findings, and then I will tell you what I plan to do in the next months. So first finding, when people think about space, they don't think about satellites. That's something, I mean, pretty obvious, but I mean, in the space community, this is not. And people go around talking about space and talking about satellites, and they don't realize that people don't know what you do with satellites, and that there are applications of the data. So the 3 applications, I say it also for the people who are here who are not obliged to know it, are Earth observations, which are kind of pictures of the Earth, and that allow to have an overview of large areas and to foresee changes. SATCOM, that we more or less know, it's about the satellite dish, which provides wireless connectivity in remote areas, and then positioning, real-time location. As you know, the European Union has provided itself with their set of satellites, which are the Copernicus system for Earth observation and Galileo for positioning. Galileo is pretty intuitive, and people at GSA have done a great work in pushing the use of Galileo into positioning devices, so into smartphones, TomToms, in cars, and so on. The real challenge that we face today is to bring the information provided by Copernicus satellites to the people. What is the challenge? That the data provided by the Copernicus satellites, free and open, have a very low resolution. But if you couple them with algorithms, you can make predictions even with low resolution data. And that offers up very big opportunities, because since the data is free, service providers are able to lower the prices of the systems embedding Copernicus data. So, sorry, how do I switch? Yeah. So, to communicate about what you can do with satellite applications, we've been pushing use cases and try to make people talk among each other on the same level, meaning that we have invited so far cities to speak with other cities about what they do with the data. So not talking about the data themselves, but talking about their uses. The example that is on this slide is particularly interesting because it concerns a little city in the Netherlands that is called Diemen. The city is very small. It has an area of 40 square meters, and the Department of Infrastructure Management went on their own without the need for additional funds, without the need for a project, to look for a company that could map soil subsidence, so the phase at which the soil sinks, with the support of satellite imagery. Now, Diemen, like most of the Netherlands, is built on soft soil and water, and the soil can sink up to 2 centimeters per year. So this means that the Department of Infrastructure has a huge work to be done to rebuild the infrastructure and the public pavement regularly. Now, with the support of this soil subsidence map that cost 10,000 euros, and that can be used for 10 years, so you see the added value there, they are able to see where the soil sinks most rapidly and to prioritize maintenance works. And they didn't need for any training to use the map. So this is the kind of story we try to communicate about. Because our idea is that this is a bit of a map of the various applications. I mean, this leaflet is available on the Geospatial Cities website of what you can do with satellite applications. Our idea is not to push the data, but to push the services, meaning that in the long term, people will use satellite-based services without knowing that satellite data is embedded. What we believe, for what we did so far, is that you don't need to tell to the cities what they need to do. And you don't need to tell them you need to use satellite data. But you need to tell service providers you need to produce services that cities can use and that they can pick up easily. So we believe that the money should go to the companies and to the cities who want to buy the services. We have produced a booklet of such examples, which is available on the Geospatial Cities website. And we have organized a series of meetings last year. And the last one was about why research projects do not become operational once they're done, which is, I think, a challenge, that the European Commission has been trying to solve for years while funding innovation. So I'll illustrate here some of the challenges that we saw that cities have. First of all, a challenge for cities is to draft the public procurement requirements needed to acquire satellite-based services, because they need to know which kind of images they need. They need to know what you can do with those. And there are some actions of the European Commission already in place to support in public procurement of innovation. So as Eurisi and with some other partners, also part of the Geospatial Cities initiative, we've been trying to reply to these calls. We haven't been successful so far, but we are continuing. So we hope to have at the point a project in which we will support public procurement of these services in some of the cities that are part of the marketplace. The second main challenge is that cities lack knowledge of what you can do and where to procure the data, and that sometimes data are in the hands of specialists that do not understand what are the real world city needs. So if it's true, I am a social scientist myself, and if it's true that, I mean, sometimes there is nothing more practical than a good theory, it's also true that social sciences should read the reality and not push the reality to become what they see it, how they see it. So I'm going to be a bit disruptive here, but I think that if the discussion about standards is very important, we don't have to forget that Europe is not China, and for very good reasons. And I mean, you can't do in Europe the same things you do in China. You can't impose to every city to do something in the same way, because you disrupt the market in that way. While, I mean, in the long term, we will have better solutions that people will know how to use. They will own the solutions, and they will be happy to pay for those, not because they are obliged, but because they see the added value. And funding should be given to cities and service providers willing to support innovation. What are the opportunities? Well, there is a need to effectively communicate on the existence of satellite-based services and data. There is a need for business cases and success stories to be disseminated. One big opportunity are Copernicus and Galileo. So the availability of this data and the availability of funding opportunities and support programs which are put in place by the European Commission and by the European Space Agency as well. One other big opportunity that we see is that cities trust local academia. So if local academia focus their geospatial projects on real needs of the cities, we increase the possibility that then after the research is done, the cities will continue using the services that they tested. And when I say services, I mean geographic information systems, systems to assess air quality, systems to provide feedback to the municipalities through GPS, through their phones, systems like the ones that George mentioned to geolocate yourself and say, I mean, if you've been in contact with people affected by Corona. So what we plan to do for the next year, I received some funds together with the French Space Agency to map some success stories of uses of Copernicus data by public administrations, including regions and cities, and non-space SMEs. And I'm going to make some videos of those that we would like to disseminate a lot, and we hope that the marketplace will also be a good place to do that through the various initiatives. And as we see the Geospatial Cities as a transversal initiative, I'm going to collaborate for sure with Judith to organize a workshop on energy and how satellite data can support solar energy production. And finally, Graham has been in touch with GEO, which is the biggest world community trying to collect satellite data and to put them at the service of community, to try to also collect success stories. So I'm going to support Graham. I didn't get feedback so far from NOAA on that, but we're also willing to support you on that. And And I repeat, since I don't think that the data are what counts, or maybe it's not the data sources that count, I would like to collaborate with the other initiatives on your activities to bring examples of use of satellite data in your respective fields of activity. Because I don't think the discussion should be on space data, the discussion should be on infrastructure, energy, resilience, green areas, air quality, and so on. And we've got good examples on those. And we are able to bring not only the service providers, but the cities to talk about their own hands-on experiences and challenges and about the costs. So that should be convincing for other cities. And finally, we know a lot of companies which have good ideas, and that could be in need for funds, because the marketplace is also about that. It's also about funding investments for innovative ideas. And that's something, we will be happy to continue doing. But for the time being, I will say that we are on the communication side, and we are trying to get projects on public procurement. But as you know, there's a lot of competition on that.
Super. Grazie, thank you very much. Another transformative topic in terms of an opportunity for cities to do things they could never do before, or to do them for 1/10 of the price. And so I think that aspect of awareness is really important. I really like the very practical nature of the use case-based approach. I think that storytelling is going to be engaging. There's clearly synergies across these initiatives. You answered, or we have answered, the one question that was in my mind at 1 minute to the hour, whether we got cut off at the hour. We haven't, so we're still here, but we should indeed close off quite quickly. Let me the headline one point and then perhaps close things out, unless anybody's got a really critical question they'd like to ask. So just to close the loop of the 4 initiatives, the Humble Lamppost started 8 years ago, December 2014, with the intention to launch something which would be a quick win. We could do it quickly, get it over and done with, and get on with the more complicated things. A long time later, we're still battling with this. And that is, I think, very, very telling in terms of the market. But it's important to think about COVID. So there's a paper that talks about shining the global light around what is it that cities are doing to use their lamppost to address COVID. There's nothing to do with light, but all about sensing. And also we have the largest group of coherent packaged material on the Smart Cities EU set, which includes some standards and some political guides. And this is the intention to actually provide consistent, trusted basis by which people can move ahead. So that's important, but we seem to be failing to actually cause it to happen. So that's kind of the state of play of that particular initiative. In closing, I don't want to close on a negative note, but I want to close on 2, I think, very important points. Number one is there's a willingness, helped by COVID, to work together. That's very clearly come out from the Scottish story. And I think the aspect that Gabor raised at the beginning of aligning initiatives and people is absolutely key. So your initiative gets here to go through Judith and actually align within the Smart Cities marketplace is precisely the sort of thing that should be done to pull in the investment community to stimulate action on something which has got a solid business case and get on with it with confidence. The second point is, and it lingers behind every conversation I've had for 8 years around the Smart Cities marketplace, it's the lack of stimulus funds. And it's not complicated and it's not large, or we make it complicated, but it's not large. And I sense that within this action cluster, we have a lot of initiatives that are just sitting there where all of us as passionate people are inhibited from being able to move it forward to the point that it really is having an impact in the market. That's a chronic problem that's been around for a long, long time. And I do not see a means by which we can resolve it, but I do see a need to be very vocal now in making that case because we have a smart cities mission and we're building some superstructure, I think we need to make our point, and I think our point after 10 years will be heard and legitimate. So I think, you know, from my perspective, that is the action, to try and find a different means by which we cause stimulus of all these great ideas that we've heard this afternoon. So George has said he wanted to comment on that, which is, I don't have the money, but I do support the idea. Go ahead, George. Georg, sorry. After 10 years, how can I do that to you?
No worries at all. Can you hear me? Because I have
this bow tie. We can see you too.
Okay. There is, you know, we have this city facility in place. What they do is they give out small grants, but in a very specific area, which is energy efficiency, essentially. Without making a commitment here, because I can't, obviously, and that's what you said, Graham. Yeah. And yes, I support the idea. Of course I do. I mean, how can I not support the idea? We will have a new marketplace turn in like 1.5 years from now, roughly. So there is an idea that there will be more budget, I understand, for the overall contract. How much that is, we will see. And maybe as part of that, and you say it's not much, in fact. I mean, maybe we can find a way which is legally sound, speaking about, speaking on behalf of the contracting authority, if you want. So when we write a tender, we do call for tender. That has to be legally sound, of course. It has to adhere to the, you know, the rules set by our colleagues from DG Budget and so on, you know, all that, blah, blah, whatever. So now maybe we find a way of introducing that kind of seed money, that pocket money thing, into this renewed approach. I was thinking about a lot of other things which are more related to, for example, capacity building. There is this ongoing challenge of having in most of the smaller cities across Europe, we have quite some regions where English is not yet a frequently spoken language, obviously. So there we have another challenge, that is translating all the knowledge and the good stories and the blueprints into a language which is essentially understandable for civil servants of all levels, you know? So there is a multitude of challenges, and I'm not quite sure if we can really address them all. But I just wanted to flag that I'm, of course, aware. And that maybe we find a way also through the mission, who knows? There will be a platform in place, as you know, or as you might have heard from Matthew this morning, which is taking care about the funding, the support actions, and that stuff. Maybe there's something in that envelope which can, you know, address the needs you're just mentioning, not maybe specifically for the marketplace community, but let's say overall for, you know, like giving that seed money to take a step forward. That's exactly, I guess, what you say, Graham, I hope.
Yes, thank you, Gil. Yeah, thank you. And it is so essential that we do that, because it feels like one's pregnant and ready to give birth. Gerard's just popped something in here about the Digital Decade Fund, which is a new one of us. So Gerard, where's the cash book for this?
Well, hi everyone, and thank you. Very, very stimulating and interesting discussion.